Let me tell you about the worst phone call a beekeeper can receive. It is a Saturday morning in late spring. You are planning to go out to your apiary after breakfast, maybe do a quick inspection, check on the colonies that have been building up nicely since March. Your phone rings. It is your neighbor, another beekeeper, someone you have known for years. His voice is different, flat, quiet in a way that tells you immediately that something is seriously wrong. He found it yesterday. American Foulbrood. 3 of his hives. By the time he called the state inspector and got a confirmation, it was already in a 4th. He's calling to warn you because your apiary is less than a mile from his, and because 2 months ago you borrowed a super from him. Just one super, just for a few weeks while you were waiting for your new equipment to arrive. You set your coffee down and stand very still in your kitchen. This is not a hypothetical. Versions of this story happen every single beekeeping season in every country where bees are kept. And the reason they keep happening is not that beekeepers are careless or ignorant. It is that American Foulbrood is unlike any other disease in beekeeping, and most beekeepers do not fully understand what they are dealing with until it is already too late. Today, we are changing that. This video is going to be direct and it is going to be honest, because this is a topic where vague information genuinely costs people everything they have built. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what American Foulbrood is, why it behaves differently from every other bee disease, how to recognize it, how it spreads, what to do if you find it, and how to make sure you never have to make that phone call to your neighbor. Let's start with the biology, because understanding what you are dealing with changes everything about how seriously you take it. American Foulbrood is caused by a spore-forming bacterium called Bacillus larvae. It infects honeybee larvae and kills them after the cells are capped, during the pupal stage of development. The infection begins when young larvae ingest spores along with their food. Nurse bees feeding contaminated food to larvae are the primary vector within the hive. Once ingested, the spores germinate in the larval gut, the bacteria multiply rapidly, and the larva dies. So far, this might sound similar to other brood diseases. It is not. What makes Bacillus larvae categorically different from virtually every other pathogen a beekeeper will ever encounter is what happens after the larva dies. The dead larva breaks down into a characteristic ropey brown mass. During this decomposition process, each infected larva produces an almost incomprehensible number of spores. Estimates vary, but a single infected larva can produce in the range of 2.5 billion spores. Not million, billion. 2.5 billion spores from one dead larva. These spores are extraordinarily resistant to environmental destruction. They are not killed by freezing. They are not killed by most common disinfectants. They are not killed by drying out. They remain viable and infectious in old comb, in honey, in wood, and in soil for decades. There are documented cases of beekeeping equipment that sat unused in a barn for 40 years, being used again, and immediately infecting a new colony placed inside it. 40 years. The spores were still active. This is the fact that changes everything about how you think about American Foulbrood. It is not a disease you treat and move on from. It is not a disease where you lose a colony, clean up, and start fresh. It is a disease that, once established in your equipment, turns that equipment into a permanent biological hazard that can infect every colony you ever place inside it for the rest of your beekeeping life. Think about what that means practically. A single contaminated frame moved from an infected hive to a healthy one during an inspection because you were not sure what you were looking at can destroy the healthy colony within weeks. That healthy colony, in its final weeks, will send out robber bees to raid neighboring hives, carrying spores with them. Those neighboring hives become infected. Their robber bees spread further. A single undetected case of American Foulbrood in one hive can spread through an entire local bee population in a single season. This is not an exaggeration. This is the documented epidemiology of the disease. And it is why beekeeping regulations in most countries treat American Foulbrood not as a standard livestock disease, but as a notifiable condition, meaning you are legally required to report it to agricultural authorities when you find it. In many jurisdictions, failing to report a confirmed case of AFB is a criminal offense, not just a regulatory violation. If you are watching this channel for the first time and this is new information, welcome, and please subscribe right now. This is exactly the kind of content we put out every week: honest, accurate, practical beekeeping information that treats you like an adult who can handle the truth about what keeping bees actually involves. Hit that subscribe button and you will not miss a single video. Now let's talk about one more aspect of the biology before we move into recognition and diagnosis in the next part, because there is a detail about how the infection progresses inside a colony that most beekeeping guides do not explain clearly enough. When American Foulbrood first enters a hive, the early stages of infection are invisible to the beekeeper. The spores are ingested by young larvae. The bacteria begin multiplying inside the larval gut, but the larvae appear normal for several days. The cell is capped over a larva that appears healthy. Only after capping does the larva die, and the characteristic signs of the disease become visible. This delayed visibility is one of the reasons AFB spreads so effectively. The nurse bees are spreading infection through the hive by feeding contaminated food to more larvae, and the beekeeper sees nothing wrong during a routine inspection because the infected larvae have not yet died. By the time the first visible symptoms appear, the infection has already spread to dozens or hundreds of cells throughout the brood nest. What looks like a mild or early case is almost always a far more advanced infection than it appears. This also means that the standard inspection practice of looking at brood frames and checking for obvious problems will not catch AFB early. You need to know the specific signs to look for in capped cells, and you need to be looking for them actively rather than waiting for something to look obviously wrong. We are going to go through those signs in precise detail in Part 2, along with the simple test that any beekeeper can perform at the hive to confirm a suspected case before calling in an inspector. There is one final thing I want to say before we move on, and it is about mindset. Some beekeepers, when they first learn how serious American Foulbrood is, respond by becoming anxious about every hive inspection, second-guessing every brood frame they look at, worrying about every piece of old equipment they own. That is not the goal of this video. The goal is the opposite. A beekeeper who understands AFB clearly, who knows exactly what to look for, who has a protocol ready for the moment they suspect a problem, is not an anxious beekeeper. They are a confident one. The disease is serious. The spores are tough. The consequences of missing it are real. And, armed with the right knowledge, you are fully capable of protecting your apiary, your neighbors' apiaries, and the broader bee population in your area from something that is genuinely preventable with the right awareness. That is what the rest of this video is about. In Part 2, we are going into the specific visual signs of American Foulbrood: the smell, the sunken and perforated cappings, the ropey brown mass, and the matchstick test that experienced beekeepers use as a first field diagnosis. If you have never seen these signs described in precise detail, Part 2 is essential viewing. There is a moment that every beekeeper who has found American Foulbrood remembers clearly. Not the phone call to the inspector, not the decision about what to do with the hive. The moment they pulled a frame, looked at it, and knew something was deeply wrong. Before they even knew what they were looking at. That moment of recognition is what this part is about. Because the earlier you can identify AFB with confidence, the more options you have, and the less damage gets done. Let's go through the signs in the exact order you would encounter them during an inspection. The first thing you notice is the cappings. In a healthy colony, capped brood has a consistent, slightly domed appearance. The cappings are uniform in color, typically light tan to medium brown, and they have a dry, smooth surface. When you look across a frame of healthy capped brood, it looks even, organized, almost like a grid. With American Foulbrood, the cappings look wrong in a way that is hard to ignore once you know what you are looking for. They become sunken and concave, collapsing inward rather than sitting flat or domed. They darken in color, becoming darker brown than surrounding healthy cells. And critically, they develop small holes or perforations where the bees have begun to uncap and investigate the dying larva inside before abandoning the effort. This combination of sunken, darkened, and perforated cappings spread across sections of the brood frame is the first and most reliable visual indicator of AFB.
Not every cell will show all three signs at once, but a frame with multiple sunken, dark, punctured cappings scattered through the brood nest should immediately put you on high alert. The second sign is what is inside those cells. When you see suspicious cappings, the next step is to uncap one or two affected cells and look inside. What you find in a healthy but dead larva looks pale and dry. What you find in an AFB-infected larva looks completely different. The larva has turned brown. Not a light tan, but a deep coffee brown that darkens further as the infection progresses. The texture has changed from the firm, segmented body of a healthy larva to something that looks almost melted, sunken into the bottom of the cell, losing its defined shape. In later stages, the larva becomes a dark, gluey mass adhered to the lower wall and bottom of the cell. The color and texture together are distinctive enough that experienced beekeepers can often make a confident preliminary identification from visual inspection alone. But there is one more test that removes almost all doubt. This is the matchstick test, and it is the single most important field diagnostic tool available to a beekeeper who suspects AFB. Take a small twig, a matchstick, a toothpick, or any thin implement, and insert it into a cell that shows suspicious signs. Push it gently into the brown mass at the bottom. Then slowly withdraw it straight back out of the cell. If what you have is American Foulbrood, the material will stretch. It will pull out of the cell in a thin, elastic, ropey string that can extend anywhere from 1 to 3 centimeters before breaking. It snaps back slightly when it breaks, like a very thin strand of caramel or rubber cement. This stringy, ropey consistency is called the rope sign, and it is the most reliable field indicator of AFB available without laboratory testing. Healthy dead larvae killed by other diseases, larvae that have simply failed to develop normally, none of these produce this ropey consistency. They will crumble or come out in a dry lump, or stay in the cell entirely. The rope is specific to the breakdown products of Pinabacillus larva infection, and if you see it, you have your answer. If you are finding this level of detail useful, hit the like button right now. It directly helps this video reach more beekeepers who need this information. And subscribe if you have not already, because this is exactly what this channel does every single week. The third sign is the smell. American Foulbrood has a characteristic odor that beekeepers who have encountered it describe consistently as a sour, rotten, glue-like smell. Some compare it to rotting wood. Some say it smells like old library books gone bad. Some describe it as a sharp, almost acidic decay smell that is distinct from the normal smell of a hive. The smell is not always strong in early or mild infections, but in a hive where AFB is well established, you will notice it the moment you remove the cover, sometimes even before.
It is one of those things that is difficult to describe precisely, but immediately recognizable once you have smelled it. If your hive smells wrong in a way you cannot identify, and you are also seeing suspicious cappings, take that smell seriously. Now, let's talk about the diseases that AFB is most commonly confused with, because misdiagnosis is a real problem, and the consequences of treating the wrong disease are significant. The most common confusion is with European Foulbrood, which is a different bacterial disease caused by Melissococcus plutoneus. European Foulbrood also causes discolored, dead larvae and can produce a sour smell. The key differences are these. European Foulbrood kills larvae before capping, so the dead larvae are visible in open cells rather than under capped cells. The dead larvae in EFB are typically yellow to brown, but do not produce the ropey consistency of the matchstick test. EFB is also generally considered less severe than AFB and responds to antibiotic treatment in many cases. Sac brood is another disease that can superficially resemble AFB at first glance. Sac brood is caused by a virus and kills larvae after capping, similar to AFB. But the dead larvae in sac brood dry out into a distinctive gondola or canoe shape, dark and flat, that peels away from the cell wall cleanly. There is no ropey consistency. There is no strong odor, and sac brood typically resolves on its own in strong colonies without intervention. Chalk brood, which is a fungal disease, produces hard, chalky white or gray mummified larvae that rattle in the cells when you shake the frame. No smell, no ropiness, completely different appearance. The matchstick test is your clearest differentiator between all of these. If it ropes, it is AFB until proven otherwise. One final point on diagnosis. A preliminary field diagnosis based on visual signs and the matchstick test is enough to justify immediate action, meaning stopping your inspection, securing the hive, and contacting your local beekeeping authority or state apiarist. You do not need to wait for laboratory confirmation before taking the hive out of active management and isolating it from your other colonies. Laboratory confirmation will come, and it is important for legal reporting purposes. But the time between your field diagnosis and lab results is time during which the hive is still a contamination risk. Act on your field diagnosis. Get the lab confirmation afterward. In Part 3, we are going into how AFB spreads, and some of what we cover there will surprise you because the most common transmission routes are not what most beekeepers expect, and several of them involve things that careful, well-intentioned beekeepers do routinely without realizing the risk. Understanding how American Foulbrood spreads is the part of this topic that makes experienced beekeepers genuinely uncomfortable. Because when you look at the transmission routes clearly, you realize that many of them run directly through normal, well-intentioned beekeeping practices. Things you do every single week without a second thought. Let's go through each route clearly. The first transmission route is within the hive itself. Once spores enter a colony, the spread is driven entirely by nurse bees doing their job. Nurse bees clean cells before the queen lays in them. If a cell contained an infected larva, the nurse bee picks up spores during cleaning and carries them to the next cell she tends. She feeds young larvae, deposits spores with the food, and the infection moves to a new larva. That larva dies, produces billions more spores, and the cycle accelerates. Within weeks, what began as a handful of infected cells becomes hundreds. The colony cannot clean its way out of this situation. The spore load grows faster than the bees can manage it. The second route is robbing behavior between colonies. When a colony becomes weak from AFB infection, its ability to defend the entrance declines. Strong neighboring colonies detect the unguarded honey and send robber bees in to take it. That honey contains spores. The robber bees carry it back to their own hive, feed it to their own larvae, and the infection transfers. This is one of the primary ways AFB moves between apiaries that are within foraging distance of each other, which in practical terms means any apiaries within 2 to 3 miles. You do not need direct contact between hives. Robbing alone is sufficient to spread the disease across an entire local bee population in a single season. The third route is swarming. A colony with AFB can swarm. The swarm carries adult bees, and those bees carry spores in their honey stomachs and on their bodies. When the swarm establishes itself in a new location, whether in a beekeeper's empty equipment or in a hollow tree, it brings the infection with it. A beekeeper who catches what looks like a healthy wild swarm and installs it in a new hive may be installing an AFB infection without any way of knowing it. This is one of the reasons why caught swarms should always be monitored carefully for brood disease signs in the weeks following installation. The fourth route is contaminated equipment, and this is where beekeeper behavior becomes the most significant factor. Frames, boxes, bottom boards, inner covers, all of these can harbor AFB spores for decades. A beekeeper who loses a colony to AFB and then stores the equipment in a shed, intending to deal with it later, has created a biological hazard that will sit there waiting for the next colony placed inside it. Years later, perhaps after the original beekeeper has forgotten exactly why that colony died, the equipment gets reused. A new colony moves in, the infection begins again. The same principle applies to second-hand equipment. Buying used hive bodies, frames, or supers from an unknown source is one of the highest risk things a beekeeper can do. The previous owner may not know their equipment was ever exposed to AFB. The spores do not announce themselves. They simply wait. If you are getting value from this video, please hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we cover exactly this kind of information, the practical details that make a real difference when you are managing real bees. Your subscription genuinely helps this channel reach more beekeepers who need it. The fifth route is the beekeeper's own tools and hands. A hive tool used inside an infected hive picks up spores. If you use that same hive tool in the next hive without disinfecting it, you have transferred spores directly. Gloves work the same way. A smoker that has been used near infected frames. Even your suit if you have been handling infected comb and then brush against frames in a healthy hive. This is the transmission route that is hardest for beekeepers to accept because it means that a careful, attentive, hard-working beekeeper can spread American Foulbrood across their entire apiary in a single afternoon of inspections, simply by not sterilizing their tools between hives. Not out of laziness, not out of ignorance of the general concept of hygiene, simply because they did not know that AFB spores specifically require something stronger than a quick wipe to neutralize. We will cover disinfection methods in Part 5, but the takeaway here is that your hive tool and your gloves should be treated as potential vectors every time you move from one hive to another, regardless of whether you suspect a problem. The sixth route is honey and wax from infected sources. This one surprises many beekeepers. Feeding honey to bees, any honey from an unknown source, including store-bought honey that is not certified disease-free, is a genuine AFB risk. Commercial honey processing does not reliably destroy AFB spores. Honey extracted from an infected hive and then used as supplemental feed for another colony can transmit the disease directly. This is why experienced beekeepers never feed bees honey from an unknown source, and why the recommendation to feed only white sugar syrup for supplemental feeding exists partly as a disease prevention measure, not just an economic one. The same principle applies to wax. Rendering wax from unknown sources and using it as foundation introduces the risk of spores being present in the finished product. If you make your own foundation, or buy foundation from a small producer, the source of the wax matters. The seventh and final route worth discussing is drift and absconding. Bees drift between hives naturally, particularly in apiaries where hives are positioned in rows facing the same direction and look similar from the outside. A forager returning to the apiary after a long flight sometimes enters the wrong hive. If that bee came from an infected colony, she carries spores with her into the healthy hive she drifts into. This route is less significant than robbing or equipment transfer, but it is real, and it is one of the reasons why minimizing drift through varied hive placement and entrance markings is a good general practice. What all of these routes have in common is that they are all completely invisible in the moment. You cannot see spores. You cannot smell them on a hive tool or a frame. You cannot tell by looking at a piece of second-hand equipment whether it has ever been inside an infected hive. The only protection is protocol. Consistent, non-negotiable habits around tool disinfection, equipment sourcing, and brood monitoring that you follow every single time, not just when you suspect a problem. In Part 4, we are going into exactly what to do in the first 24 hours after you find or suspect American Foulbrood in one of your hives. The decisions you make in that window matter enormously, both for your own apiary and for every beekeeper within foraging distance of you. You have just found what you think is American Foulbrood: sunken cappings, the ropey pull of the matchstick test, maybe that smell. Your hands are shaking slightly, and your mind is moving fast. This is the moment where the decisions you make in the next few hours determine how much damage gets done, not just to your apiary, but to every beekeeper near you. So let's go through exactly what to do in order, without panic and without delay. The first thing you do is stop the inspection immediately. Do not pull any more frames. Do not move anything between hives. Set down whatever frame you are holding, gently and carefully, back into the hive it came from. Close the hive up. You are done inspecting for today. Every additional frame you pull increases the chance of spores transferring to your gloves, your hive tool, your suit. Every second the hive stays open increases robbing risk from neighboring colonies. Close it. Do it now. The second thing you do is isolate your tools. The hive tool you used inside that hive should not touch anything else until it has been properly disinfected. Same with your gloves. If you are wearing fabric gloves, take them off and bag them separately. Your hive tool goes into a container, not back into your pocket or your equipment bag where it will contaminate everything else. If you have more hives to check that day, do not check them. Come back another day with clean equipment after you have dealt with this situation. The third thing you do is mark the hive clearly. Put something visible on the hive that tells you and anyone else who might approach it that this hive is under suspicion and is not to be opened or moved. A piece of tape across the entrance, a marked flag, anything that makes the hive's status immediately obvious. If you share an apiary with other beekeepers, contact them immediately and tell them what you found. Do not wait until you have a confirmed diagnosis. Tell them now so they can avoid their own hives until the situation is assessed. The fourth thing you do is contact your local beekeeping authority. In most countries, American Foulbrood is a notifiable disease. This means you are legally required to report a suspected case to the relevant agricultural authority, state apiarist, or beekeeping inspector. In the United States, this means contacting your state Department of Agriculture. In the United Kingdom, it means contacting the National Bee Unit. In Australia, it means your state Department of Primary Industries. In most of Europe, there are regional veterinary or agricultural authorities responsible for bee health. I want to address something directly here, because I know what some of you are thinking. Reporting feels scary. It feels like inviting trouble, like someone is going to come and take your bees away and burn everything you have built. I understand that fear, and I want to be honest with you about what actually happens when you report. In most jurisdictions, a beekeeping inspector will visit your apiary, confirm the diagnosis, assess the extent of the infection, and work with you on a response plan. They are not there to punish you. They are there because AFB is a community-level problem, not just a personal one, and managing it correctly requires expertise and coordination. Inspectors have seen this many times. They know what they are looking at, and in most cases, they genuinely want to help you navigate the situation with as little loss as possible. What happens when you do not report is worse. The infection continues to spread. Neighboring beekeepers lose colonies without knowing why. The local bee population takes damage that could have been contained. And if it eventually becomes clear that you knew and said nothing, the legal and community consequences are far more serious than anything that comes from reporting promptly. Report it. Do it the same day you find it. If you are finding this video useful and you want to keep getting honest, practical information like this every week, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the like button. It takes 5 seconds and it makes a real difference in helping this content reach the beekeepers who need it. The fifth thing to do while you are waiting for the inspector is to review your records. Think back over the last several weeks and months. Which hives have you inspected with the same tools? Have you moved any frames or equipment between hives recently? Have you borrowed equipment from anyone or lent equipment to anyone? Have you installed a package or a swarm in the last few months? Have you fed honey from an outside source? Write all of this down. Your inspector will ask these questions, and your answers will help them trace the possible source of the infection and identify other hives that may have been exposed. The more accurately you can reconstruct your recent beekeeping activities, the better the response can be targeted. If you have multiple hives in your apiary, think carefully about which ones may have had contact with the infected hive through your tools or through robbing behavior. These are the hives that will need to be inspected first, either by you with clean equipment or by the inspector when they arrive. The sixth thing to understand is what not to do, and this list is just as important as the action steps. Do not harvest honey from the infected hive or any hive you suspect may be connected to it. Honey from an AFB-infected hive contains spores. Using it as feed for other colonies spreads the disease. Selling it or giving it away spreads the disease. It needs to be treated as contaminated material. Do not move frames, boxes, or any equipment from the suspected hive to other hives or to storage where it might later be reused. Every piece of equipment that has been inside an AFB-positive hive is potentially contaminated and needs to be assessed before it goes anywhere else. Do not attempt to treat the hive with antibiotics before the inspector has visited and confirmed the diagnosis. We will talk about treatment in detail in Part 5, but the reason for this specific instruction is that antibiotic treatment can suppress the visible symptoms of AFB without eliminating the spores. A hive that has been treated with antibiotics may look healthier on inspection, which can delay accurate diagnosis and give the infection more time to spread undetected. Do not combine the suspected hive with any other colony. This is an instinct some beekeepers have when they see a struggling hive, to combine it with a stronger one to save the bees. With AFB, combining a sick colony with a healthy one does not save the sick colony. It destroys the healthy one. The 24 hours after you find a suspected AFB case are genuinely critical. Every action you take in that window either contains the problem or expands it. The steps above are not complicated. They do not require special equipment or expertise. They require calmness, discipline, and the willingness to stop what you are doing and deal with the situation directly. In Part 5, we are going into the harder decisions: treatment, destruction, and disinfection. What actually works, what does not, and how to make the call between saving equipment and eliminating a contamination source permanently. This is the part of the American Foulbrood conversation that nobody enjoys, because the decisions we are talking about here involve destroying things you built, equipment you paid for, colonies you raised and cared for. There is no way to make that easy. But there is a way to make it clear, and clarity is what protects you and every beekeeper around you. Let's start with the most difficult question first. When does a hive with AFB need to be destroyed completely? The honest answer is more often than most beekeepers want to hear. A colony with a confirmed AFB infection that has spread through a significant portion of the brood nest is almost always beyond practical recovery. The spore load in the comb, in the honey stores, in the wood of the frames and boxes is too high to eliminate through any treatment that leaves the colony and equipment intact. The standard recommendation from beekeeping authorities in most countries is to destroy the bees, the comb, and the wooden equipment by burning, then bury the ash. Not store the equipment, not treat it and see what happens. Burn it. This recommendation is hard to accept. A full Langstroth hive setup represents real money. The bees represent months of buildup. Burning all of it feels catastrophic. But consider the alternative. Contaminated equipment that is stored rather than destroyed becomes a source of reinfection for every future colony placed in it, and a risk to neighboring apiaries if it is ever moved, sold, or borrowed. The short-term financial pain of destruction is almost always smaller than the long-term cost of a persistent infection source in your apiary. How do you burn a hive correctly? Take the entire hive, frames, boxes, bottom board, inner cover, and outer cover to a location where you can burn safely. Douse the equipment thoroughly with an accelerant and burn it completely until nothing recognizable remains.
The ash should then be buried at least a foot deep to prevent scavenging animals from dispersing contaminated material. Do not burn near your apiary or near neighboring apiaries. Do not leave partially burned material that could be moved by wind or animals. Now, let's talk about what can potentially be saved, because not everything associated with an infected hive is necessarily a total loss. Metal components, including metal queen excluders and metal frame spacers, can be sterilized effectively by scorching with a blowtorch until the metal is visibly too hot to touch. Spores cannot survive that level of heat applied directly to a metal surface. Beekeeping suits and fabric equipment can be washed at high temperature, above 60 degrees Celsius, with detergent, and then exposed to direct sunlight for several hours. This significantly reduces, but may not completely eliminate, spore contamination. For high-value suits from a confirmed AFB apiary, replacement is the safer choice. Glass or plastic feeders can be disinfected using a solution of sodium hypochlorite, which is household bleach, at a concentration of approximately 0.5%, meaning roughly 1 part bleach to 200 parts water. Soak the equipment for at least 20 minutes, rinse thoroughly, and allow to dry completely before reuse. Hive tools are best disinfected by scorching with a blowtorch, the same approach used for metal components. A few seconds of direct flame applied to the working surfaces of a hive tool is sufficient to destroy spores on the metal. This should become a routine practice between every hive you inspect, not just after a confirmed AFB case. Now, let's address antibiotics honestly, because this is an area where there is genuine confusion and, in some parts of the world, genuine misuse. In the United States, the antibiotic oxytetracycline, sold under various brand names, has historically been used as a treatment for American foulbrood. More recently, tylosin tartrate has also been approved for use in bees in some jurisdictions. These antibiotics can suppress the vegetative form of Penibacillus larvae, meaning the actively growing bacteria, and can reduce visible symptoms of the disease. Here is what they cannot do.
they cannot kill AFB spores. The spores are the persistent, nearly indestructible form of the bacteria, and antibiotics have no effect on them. A colony treated with antibiotics may appear to recover. The visible symptoms may diminish, but the spore load in the comb remains. The moment antibiotic treatment stops, the bacteria can resume their vegetative growth from those spores, and the symptoms return. Antibiotic treatment of AFB is suppression, not cure. This is why in many countries, including the United Kingdom and Australia, antibiotic treatment of AFB is not permitted at all. The regulatory position in those countries is that suppressing symptoms without eliminating spores creates a false impression of a healthy hive, while the actual infection source remains in place, which makes the disease harder to track and control at a population level. They are not wrong. If you are in a jurisdiction where antibiotic treatment is legal, and your inspector recommends it as part of a management plan, follow their guidance. They know your local regulatory environment and the specifics of your case. But go into that treatment with a clear understanding of what it does and does not achieve. Antibiotics buy time. They do not solve the underlying problem. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep getting this level of honest, accurate information every week. And hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps this video reach beekeepers who are dealing with exactly this situation. There is one treatment approach worth mentioning that goes beyond antibiotics and addresses the spore problem more directly. It is called the shook swarm method, and in countries where it is practiced, it has a reasonable success rate in mild to moderate AFB cases. The shook swarm involves shaking all the bees from an infected hive onto clean, new foundation in a completely new box, leaving all the contaminated comb and equipment behind. The bees themselves carry some spore load, but it is far lower than the load in the comb. Placed on clean foundation with a full antibiotic treatment course in jurisdictions where this is permitted, a proportion of shook swarm colonies do recover and go on to establish healthy colonies on clean comb. The contaminated equipment from a shook swarm procedure must still be destroyed, the comb especially. The shook swarm saves the bees but eliminates the infected material, which is where the spore reservoir is concentrated. This method is not universally recommended and is not appropriate for severe infections. Whether it is a viable option in your specific case is something to discuss with your inspector based on the extent of the infection and your local regulations. The final point for this section is about the mindset of moving forward after an AFB diagnosis. Losing hives and equipment to American Foulbrood is a significant setback. It is also not the end of your beekeeping. Beekeepers who have been through this and come out the other side consistently say the same thing. The loss was painful, but the knowledge they gained made them better, more careful, more attentive beekeepers than they had been before. They now know what to look for. They now have protocols for tool disinfection and equipment sourcing that they will never skip again. They understand the disease in a way that makes them genuinely useful to other beekeepers in their community when the same situation arises. In the final part of this video, we are closing with prevention, because everything we have covered in this video points toward one conclusion. AFB is far easier to prevent than to deal with once it arrives. Everything we have covered in this video leads to one conclusion. American Foulbrood is a disease that rewards prevention far more than it rewards response. The biology is too persistent, the consequences are too serious, and the options once it arrives are too painful for any beekeeper to prefer dealing with it over avoiding it entirely. So let's close this out with a clear, practical prevention framework, not a vague list of tips, a real protocol that you can build into your beekeeping routine, starting with your next inspection. The foundation of AFB prevention is regular brood monitoring. Most beekeepers look at their frames during inspections, but do not look at them with disease specifically in mind. There is a difference. Looking at brood to assess colony health means checking that there are eggs, that the population is building, that the queen is laying well. Looking at brood with AFB in mind means specifically examining capped cells for sunken, darkened, or perforated cappings, checking that the overall pattern is consistent and even, and being alert to any smell that is different from the normal warm, waxy, slightly sweet smell of a healthy hive. Add this specific check to every single inspection. It takes less than 2 minutes per hive. You are already looking at the frames. You just need to know what you are looking for and to look deliberately. If anything looks even slightly suspicious, you do the matchstick test before you close the hive. Not later, not at your next inspection, right then. The earlier you catch AFB, the more options you have. A single infected frame found in an otherwise healthy colony is a very different situation from a colony where half the brood nest is showing symptoms. Early detection does not guarantee an easy outcome, but it dramatically improves your odds of containing the problem before it spreads. The second prevention practice is strict tool disinfection between hives. Your hive tool is the most direct physical link between every hive in your apiary. If you use it inside an infected hive and then use it in a healthy one without disinfecting it in between, you are doing the disease's spreading work for it. The most practical disinfection method for a hive tool during an active inspection session is a small container of alcohol, either isopropyl alcohol at 70% concentration or ethanol combined with a lighter. Dip the hive tool, burn off the alcohol, allow it to cool for a few seconds, and proceed to the next hive. This takes approximately 30 seconds and destroys surface contamination reliably. Scorching with a blowtorch is more thorough and is the right choice for deep disinfection between inspection sessions. But the alcohol and flame method is practical in the field and far better than nothing. Apply the same thinking to your gloves. Disposable nitrile gloves that are changed between hives are the cleanest option. If you use fabric gloves, have multiple pairs and change them between hives when you are doing a full apiary inspection. The third prevention practice is controlling what enters your apiary. Every piece of equipment with an unknown history is a potential AFB vector. Second-hand hive bodies, frames, supers, bottom boards, all of these can carry spores from a previous infected colony that the seller may not even know about. Before buying second-hand equipment, ask directly whether the seller has ever had AFB in their apiary. Inspect any second-hand wooden equipment carefully before use. If you cannot verify its history, treat it as suspect. The same principle applies to bees. Packages and nucleus colonies from reputable suppliers who actively monitor and test for disease are a significantly lower risk than swarms of unknown origin or bees purchased through informal channels. This does not mean never catch a swarm. It means monitor any swarm colony carefully for the first several weeks after installation, specifically watching for brood disease signs. Never feed bees honey from an unknown source. This point cannot be overstated. Honey can carry AFB spores. Store-bought honey, honey given to you by another beekeeper, honey harvested from a wild colony. None of these are safe to feed to your bees unless you know with certainty that they are AFB-free. White sugar syrup has no disease risk. When in doubt, feed syrup. If you are building your beekeeping knowledge seriously and you want a channel that gives you this level of honest, practical information every week, subscribe right now and hit the like button. It makes a genuine difference in helping this content reach more beekeepers. The fourth prevention practice is joining your local beekeeping association and staying connected to your regional bee health network. AFB does not respect property lines. A confirmed case 2 miles from your apiary is relevant information for you. Many regional beekeeping associations have early warning systems, email lists, or social media groups where confirmed disease cases are reported so that local beekeepers can increase their monitoring. Being part of that network means you are not managing your apiary in isolation. You have access to information that can prompt you to look more carefully at your own hives before a problem arrives at your door. Your state apiarist or regional bee inspector is also a resource, not just an authority. These people have seen more AFB cases than most beekeepers will see in a lifetime. If you are not sure what you are looking at inside a hive, a phone call or email to your regional inspector is a completely reasonable first step. Most of them welcome that kind of proactive engagement far more than a call that comes after a problem has already spread. The fifth and final prevention practice is keeping good records. A hive journal that notes the date of every inspection, what you observed, and what actions you took creates a timeline that is invaluable in two situations. First, it helps you identify changes in a colony's brood pattern over time that might not be alarming in isolation, but are clearly significant when you see them developing across multiple inspections. Second, if you ever do face an AFB diagnosis, your records help you and your inspector trace the likely source and identify which other hives may have been exposed through equipment sharing or inspection order. Your records do not need to be complicated. Date, hive identifier, brood pattern assessment, any anomalies, actions taken.
5 lines per inspection is enough. Over a season, those notes become a picture of your apiary's health that no amount of memory can replicate. American Foulbrood is a serious disease. It deserves to be taken seriously. But it is not a disease that should make you afraid of beekeeping. The beekeepers who lose the most to AFB are the ones who did not know what to look for, did not have a monitoring habit, and did not act quickly when something looked wrong. You now have all 3 of those things. Leave a comment below and tell me one change you are going to make to your inspection routine after watching this video. One specific thing. Whether it is doing the matchstick test at your next inspection, setting up a tool disinfection station at your apiary, or finally joining your local beekeeping association. One thing. Write it down in the comments and hold yourself to it. Thank you for watching the whole way through. Take care of your bees, stay observant, and we will see you in the next one.